Hey guys, and welcome back. So, with End of Dragons, the third expansion for Guild Wars 2, getting its first look event tomorrow, I wanted to have a think and put together my wish list of things that I would love to see in Cantha. So, here we go. Also, obviously, a spoiler warning for the Guild Wars 2 story. So, first things first, let's talk the story. Currently, we're in a bit of a brief lull in the conflict. All of the major antagonists of the story as of champions have been dealt with. Bangar lost control of the Dominion and is going through an ordeal from Dragon Corruption withdrawal. Ryland and his Frost Legions have fallen, and the Elder Dragons Jormag and Primordus have also fallen. Prematurely in my opinion, but let's not go down that rabbit hole. With the death of two more Elder Dragons, there is an abundance of magic being released back into Tyria, a portion of which seems to have been absorbed by Aurene and dissipated, but some of which seems to be releasing into the world and heading south towards Cantha, towards the final Elder Dragon. Now, as our party already knows the dangers of uncontained magical energy from our years dealing with unbound and volatile magic, a simple intro to Cantha could be following this magic with Aurene, so that we can channel and distribute it safely. However, hopefully, upon arrival in Cantha, our party will run into some problems with the Ministry of Purity. So, if you don't know, in 1127 AE, almost 200 years before the start of Guild Wars 2, Emperor Usoku, supported by the Ministry of Purity, invaded the Luxans and the Kurziks, and then banned all non-humans from the Canthan Empire. Some of this is covered in Guild Wars Factions, mainly the start and the rise of the Ministry of Purity in Guild Wars Factions with the Winds of Change story after the main story. But this policy of non-humans will make it very difficult for most members of Dragon's Watch, and around 60% of player characters, according to Guild Wars 2 efficiency statistics, to actually get into Cantha. So one of my main wishes is that the Ministry of Purity is still alive and their policies are still going as we head into Cantha for End of Dragons. And this leads me on to my next item on the wish list, a branching story. A branching story is not something we see much of in Guild Wars. There was a minuscule branch in Path of Fire with Amnoon, which was really just different rewards and a couple of different dialogues in the background, but no different missions. Of course, we did have a bit of this in the personal story, either depending on your race, and also with the Vigil Priory and Order of Whispers. But that was, well, the personal story. But also, by the time we got to Ore, it was very centralized. But we also got branches in Guild Wars Factions, which was the first dive into Cantha. Now, while I don't think a huge branching storyline with multiple endings is plausible for an MMO, it's a bit much trying to deal with that in the next part of the story and get people back on a similar line. However, it will be really, really nice to see little branches throughout the story with choices being able to be made by the player and affected by their character race and profession, which we have seen little bits of here and there, mainly with Heart of Thorns and Sylvari characters through dialogue, but also with a few small mechanics in Living World Season 3 and 4. A perfect starting point can be on entering Cantha with a branch for human and non-human characters. Perhaps humans are taken away and initially are fooled with regards to the whereabouts of the rest of their party, while non-human characters are taken to some sort of holding cell and have to break out to find out what's happening, and when escaping they are forced out of the Canthan Empire deep into the wilderness of the Echo Vale Forest, where they could spend Act 1 trying to regroup with the party. While on the overall story arc, branches like this will be a little bit insignificant, meaning it'll be easier to write future content, I think it would also add much more replayability of the story content if you can take different paths and have a unique playthrough on a replay. One of the big differences between Guild Wars 1 and 2 is the amount of side quests in Guild Wars 1. They are everywhere in Guild Wars 1 and have been traded in for events and hearts in Guild Wars 2. In saying that, Guild Wars 2 still has a side quest or two. One of note comes from a Coden in the Biora Marches, who asks the player to feed its hunger. And yeah, mainly it's just a collection spruced up with a bit of dialogue, but I think that a few of these side story collections dotted around each map would really help add a bit of depth and lore, maybe aided with an event and focusing on topics that are not the focus of the main story, maybe things like afflicted remnants haunting the Undercity, or perhaps following Ashu and the corruption of the Canthan government, picking up where Winds of Change left off, in perhaps a scrying pool or flashback sort of scenario. These could also be further reaching than a typical Heart, spanning different maps and regions of those maps. And speaking of maps in Guild Wars 2 expansions, typically we have gotten 6 per expansion at launch. Heart of Thorns with 4 main maps and 2 guild halls. Path of Fire with 5 main maps and 1 guild hall. So, if End of Dragons, if we receive a similar amount, you'd expect Xingje Island, Kainan City, we might get Kainan Center as well, as a smaller, more dense map. Echo Vale Forest, Jade Sea, and maybe Raisu Palace as a guild hall. And those are all classic locations from Guild Wars factions. And while it would be great to see those classic Guild Wars factions locations redesigned for Guild Wars 2 with gliding and griffins, it would also be really nice to get maps in new locations, and it would also be great to have more than the now typical 6 maps. Perhaps heading to the mountains to the east of Cantha, maybe to the southern coast of the Jade Sea, or to the unexplored urban areas to the southwest. It would also be great to get Kainan Center as a city-style map. We haven't had a new city map, unless you count the rebuilding of Lion's Arch, since Guild Wars 2 launched. And with the new global bonus event system, there could be events to help connect Cantha to the rest of Tyria, such as an event to help build an Surrogate in Kainan Center to link up to Lion's Arch. Map density is something that will hopefully improve from Path of Fire. In Heart of Thorns, maps were smaller and more dense with meta events that took the entire focus of the map. Path of Fire had a different approach with larger maps that had less density and less connected but still meta event style event chains. This kind of suited the desert theme, as deserts tend to be more barren than a jungle. However, in my opinion, the meta events from Path of Fire were not as memorable as the ones we got in Heart of Thorns. With End of Dragons, I would love to see a more balanced approach, with some meta event focused maps similar to Heart of Thorns. I feel like this could suit the likes of Kainan City. A more dense lane style map system would work well there. You could get another large, winding Dragon Stand-esque meta event, perhaps with the Ampha or Jade Brotherhood, or a new faction taking the center stage. But we could also have some more chill, spaced out maps, not quite as dense and claustrophobic as a cityscape, which would suit areas like the Jade Sea very nicely. Speaking of the Jade Sea, the impact of the Jade Wind is another point of discussion. After the death of Shiro Tagachi, the effect the Jade Wind had on the landscape of Cantha around the Harvest Temple began to falter. The Echo Vale Forest began to change back from its petrified state and grow again, and there are also rumours of the Jade Sea beginning to thaw. While this is great for the people of Cantha, I really hope the effects of the Jade Wind are at least still partially there to this day. Having cities carved into the Jade Sea like Cavalon was awesome to see, and could be taken to a much bigger scale with taller cityscapes that would just look awesome. And if the Jade Sea is partially thawed, it could be a really amazing place to have underwater caverns of jade that would allow players to take more advantage of the underwater skimmer mastery. Perhaps best case scenario, especially for long-term fans, is a partially restored state, so we can still get some of those awesome landscapes, such as the boats frozen in the crests of jade waves, while also having the land in process of healing. Perhaps even there is some sort of group trying to stop the healing process and continue the work of Shiro and Abaddon that we can help to take out. So one thing I would really love to see is no mounts at launch. While this might seem a bit of an odd thing to be hoping for, I really think with mounts, especially the likes of a sky scale, it leaves players to run around the very top of the map as high as possible, skipping all of the environmental work. This isn't too much of a problem in places like the Crystal Desert with the original 5 mounts, but in the hopefully dense maps of Cantha, it could be really annoying. However, I do think sky skills should be allowed eventually. Perhaps there's a lore-based reason, such as the Canthan government tries to block your mounts from entering because they're entering from Tyria and they're not Canthan, and the player receives them back maybe by the end of Act 1 or 2, you know, like a little bit into the story, once you've been playing around in Cantha for a little bit. Or perhaps it's mounts are not allowed in Kynan Center like they tried to do in the Amnoon Casino, leaving you free to use them outside of the city walls, but inside the city you have to run around and glide around. Or perhaps players can just unlock Canthan versions of the mounts, so they have a little bit of work to do when they get there, but they can get them eventually. Obviously without the expensive costs, unless it's your first time buying the mount. At the end of the day, this isn't a huge issue. I just personally think that it would be nice to have to run around in unknown lands for a bit on our own 2 feet. This is definitely something that I think everyone wants to see with End of Dragons, and while it will be amazing to see a new playable race and a new personal story join the roster with Cantha, and we also have the perfect choice of Tengu, I think it could be just a little bit too much work to get all of the armor skins working on a new model. So hopefully ArenaNet has put in the grind and got it all working. Or perhaps they use a alt version of the Char model and somehow add feathers and stuff, and basically it's a Char but it looks like a Tengu. I could settle for that. I really would love to see players running around on Tengu characters, and maybe a Tengu storyline where the players get back at the Canthan Empire and restore the Tengu and their culture to Cantha. But if it is too much, at the very least, I'm hoping to see lots of new character models added to the game for all the current races, such as new hairstyles, new faces, new ears, new everything. So a few little small things that I really didn't think was worth writing more than half a paragraph about, but would love to see in End of Dragons. Here we go. I would love to see the original Beetle Racing minigame return to Guild Wars 2 with that original track. Even if we didn't get the power-ups and just got the track, that would be cool, but if they brought back the power-ups, that would be even better. And perhaps make different tracks around the different lands of Tyria with Ilona and Kryta and the Shiver Peaks and all those places. And maybe even a tournament event every now and then. I would also love to see the return of the lore-based scavenger quests for Generation 3 legendaries. While some may prefer to instantly craft, I think the optional scavenger hunts were a lot of fun to try out. Some were a bit tedious, but it also helped space out the legendary grinding, and the system could work even better if the events were added into the maps at the start with the intention of being used for legendaries, rather than the collection just tagging on to the original events. And finally, more variety of enemy factions. In Guild Wars factions there was a large range of enemy factions. In Cantha, the Afflicted and the Shuriken were the main focus, but we also had the Ampha and the Jade Brotherhood, and the Wardens in the Echo Veiled Forest, as well as the Ministry coming in with the Winds of Change. And also, of course, the Luxons and the Kurziks, who were more neutral and you would ally with one of those factions throughout the course of the story. Now, in Guild Wars 2 we don't get as many factions, but this was something that was improved on by Path of Fire from Heart of Thorns, Path of Fire having 3 and Heart of Thorns having 1. But I would love to see some more variety of enemy factions in Cantha, and potentially some of the classics returning, especially the Afflicted. So that's my list of stuff that I would love to see from End of Dragons, some of which is more likely than others and some of which we might see on Tuesday. I didn't touch on elite specs, though I am hoping for a sword or maybe short bow for Necro, and I feel like with Mesmer, with that little teaser image thing, that we might even get Spear as a main weapon. That would be pretty cool. So yeah, that is the list. The Minister of Purity to return branching storylines, side stories, more than 6 maps, new maps, more dense maps than Path of Fire, Jade Wind still at least partially in effect, no mounts at launch, Tengu player race, Beetle Racing to return, Generation 3 Legendary Collections, more variety for enemies than Heart of Thorns and Path of Fire. But of course, Cantha has been disconnected from the rest of Tyria since the Rising of Ore. A lot can change. There's a lot of room for ArenaNet to change things about without too much hassle, so maybe I shouldn't have been reading in too much into Guild Wars faction stuff. But there we go. Thank you guys so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed. Leave a like if you did and subscribe for more in future. And also, if you have any ideas of yourself, leave them down below. Why not? That's it from me for today. You can join the Discord. The link for that is down below to stay up to date with all things new on the channel, such as new videos when I go live and our weekly screenshot challenge every Saturday in Guild Wars 2. And I hope you all enjoy the Tuesday live stream. I'm looking forward to watching it myself. I wonder what we're going to see. And I can't wait to talk about it that evening. It's going to be good. Right, that's it from me for today. Until next time, stay safe and take care.